our two speakers today, Hollis and Ben Seymore. We're going to be talking about the situation with China. So at this point, with no further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Hollis.
Thank you, Carl. China is a very broad subject, so we'll try to narrow it down. At the end of this presentation, you will know why China may use its military to confront us in the near future. And I say near future. The Peking trap. Rising powers become most aggressive when their fortunes fade, their enemies multiply, and they realize that they must act now or lose the moment forever. Good examples of this are Germany in 1914, Japan 1941, and Putin's recent invasion of Ukraine. This blend of opportunity and anxiety make a deadly cocktail. As I said, those three examples are very good examples of ambition, desperation, and aggression. I don't know, I'm sure you've all seen the Godfather movie. And Frankie Pantangelo comes in, and Michael Cologne's sitting in his old living room, and he tells him who hit him. And Michael Pantangelo says, "Let's get him now, Mike, while we got the muscle." And that's the same principle that I'm talking about here. Ambition, desperation, and aggression. To these ends, power, territory, influence, and global supremacy. To these ends, the Chinese people and their leaders view us as a dangerous, hostile nation, and they believe that we will do everything that we can to keep them down. National strategy. It's important that I give you a little history about this because I think it's relevant to the overall topic. In 1949, Mao Zedong created the Chinese Communist Party, and he made it the sole party in China and guaranteed its supremacy by putting it in the Constitution. Military strategy. Since 1990, the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, has grown tenfold to the point that in 2030, its nuclear arsenal will equal ours. So we're not talking about a small country, we're talking about a very powerful country. In 1949, Zhou Enlai, and once again, I hope I pronounced that right, he created China's diplomatic corps. Its motto was to always, and he created this motto, to always stand firmly in position, master CCP policies, and strictly observe the military-style discipline. All of the Chinese diplomats attend military boot camp. When we think of democracy, we think of persuasive dialogue and hopefully compromise. But when they think of democracy, or when they're in their diplomatic mission, they are restricted to a more coercive dialogue. Like I said, stand in position dialogue. So if they get the wrong message, they have no room for compromise. They're not really diplomats. They're what I said. They're a civilian army of the CCP. Of course, usually two of them stand together because they don't trust each other. Sun Tzu, I talked about military history. He said our primary target should be the mind of the opposing commander. Xi Jinping took control in 2012, and in 2018 he made himself chairman of everything. He is an autocratic leader. Xi Jinping had to purge more than 1 million people to gain his chairmanship. He's 70 years old. He's an obese smoker. He has a stressful job. He is quick-tempered with a delicate sense of honor. A man anxious to defend his or his country's honor or reputation, pays attention to almost nothing else. He's easily provoked, And I'm sure that my colleague Ben is going to talk about that in the future. Australia, not too long ago, is a good example when Australia criticized China about the COVID-19 policy and where its origin was. We know the CCPs killed millions of people. The Cultural Revolution, the Great Leap Forward, and Tiananmen Square protests. All of this to protect their power. Today, it uses advanced surveillance and a digital monetary system to keep its citizens on the CCP track. The leaders know that the collapse of the CCP will most likely lead to their death. In CCP politics, paranoia is a virtue rather than a vice. Today, regaining lost territories generally refers to those territories lost in the last century when it was weak, Taiwan being the focal point. In addition to its historical claim, China wants Taiwan because it can give them clear access to the South China Sea and the Pacific Ocean. As it is now, China claims territorial waters that conflict with Vietnam, Malaysia, Indochina, Brunei, I hope I pronounced that right, Philippines, and Taiwan's own claims. They want Japan's Senkaku Islands for the same reason. China wants Taiwan's microchip manufacturing capabilities, which are controlled by the TSMC Corporation. It's listed on the exchange, several of its forever stocks. It's the 6th largest corporation in the world. Specifically, they want the 3 and 2 nanometer chips, which we use in our military extensively, and which so far we've been able to prevent China from having access to them. And this is a prelude to a much broader strategy. Global power. China believes the Chinese people are superior, ahead of everybody else in the natural order of things. They have been taught this and appear to be in harmony with their leaders on this point. CCP leaders view themselves as heirs to a Chinese state was a superpower for most of recorded history. After Taiwan, the next step in their power quest is the South China Sea, which they view as a springboard to global power. How did China advance so far in such a short time? At its creation in 1949, after the Great March, China was technologically backward, overpopulated, and poverty-ridden. In 1970, Mao Zedong made it a law that couples could only have one child. Can you imagine a leader that has that much power that can say you can only have one child? 1970s when he did this. After President Nixon's visit in 1972, Gesundheit, Mao permitted some foreign contact. After Mao's death in 1976, a more enlightened approach to economic reforms went into place. China's overriding attraction to outside capitalists has been its vast markets and cheap labor. We made China what it is today. In order to gain access, you had to be an influential person that China could use. They're not interested in anybody they can't use. And you also had to keep quiet about their humanitarian abuses. Those foreign elites who were granted legitimacy, which China calls friends, they have their own definition of the friends, were given lucrative financial deals. Millions of dollars changed hands. This list includes heads of state, Silicon Valley executives, Wall Street executives, diplomats, higher education leaders, and notable sports figures. In a face-to-face meeting with Xi Jinping, Mark Zuckerberg actually asked him if he would give his son a Chinese name. Xi Jinping refused politely. He said it was too great of honor. China's growth was fantastic. Real gross domestic product grew 37-fold from 1978 to 2018. Today, China has one of the world's largest economies, measured by purchasing power parity, manufacturing output, trade surplus, and financial reserves. In 2018, it was the top trading partner for 128 nations. And I see in today's paper that we're certainly one of them. We are probably the top trading partner. The People's Liberation Army used that money to build weapons, ballistic anti-ship missiles, attack submarines, surface ships, and launch satellites with military capability into space. The PLA is preparing for war. China's declining population. China's one child per couple ended in 2016. That was 46 years that one child per couple was the law in China. Since 2000, China has had 10 working age adults for every one senior citizen 65 or older. No population has ever been more primed for productivity. This imbalance alone accounted for a quarter of China's rapid growth since 1990. China is about to suffer a demographic crisis. There are 40 million more bachelors than there are single women of similar age. Divorce rates are high. More women are choosing not to get married and have children. Too many men competing for too few women. That's not a good idea. That's 40 million extra men. We only had 100,000 invade on D-Day. Most significantly, working age population has begun to decrease. By 2025, according to some projections, the sale of adult diapers will exceed the sale of baby diapers. China's age-related spending will need to triple as a share of GDP from 10 to 30% in the next 30 years to prevent Chinese senior citizens from literally dying in the streets. And China is powerless to change this. Absolutely powerless. Resources. China's running out of resources. Half of China's river water and nearly 90% of its groundwater is unfit to drink. 60% is unsafe for human contact, industrial or agricultural use. Beijing has roughly the same amount of water as Saudi Arabia. China has abused and worn out its farmland. I know there's some farmers out here. Pollution has destroyed 20%, and an additional 1 million square miles of farmland have become desert. The Gobi Desert has advanced to 40 miles, within 40 miles of Beijing, forcing resettlement of 24,000 villages. They had to move. The land is no good. It's used up. They made that rapid growth at a very steep cost. China imports 75% of its oil and 45% of its natural gas, mostly through sea lanes. The CCP is building overland pipelines, rails and roads from the Caspian oil fields through Russia, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan to keep our Navy from interfering with these critical shipments in time of war. Today, China gets a high percentage of its oil and LNG, liquid natural gas, from Iran, which must go through the Hormuz, I hope I pronounced that right, Strait, and the Strait of Malacca, which our Navy can easily block. The Strait of Malacca is over 50 miles long and at its narrowest point is 1.5 miles wide. that can easily be stopped. But a lady today asked me a question about the oil. Now, China's reserve is roughly 90 days if we were to stop all the oil shipments. Now, it's using its reserve. Now, you know who sold them part of that oil. Okay? All of these have inelastic demand curves. That means that the amount of product consumed is less than the percentage of change of price. Gasoline's a good example of an inelastic demand curve. But certainly water is. You need water to live. Agriculture, land, inelastic demand curves. China's strategic reach. China has little choice but to turn nations into geopolitical spheres that is orientated toward Beijing. It's doing this through its Belt and Road Initiative. I always thought it was Belts and Roads, but it is Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, and its digital Silk Road projects. BRI is basically a $1 trillion infrastructure loan program. And the Digital Silk Road project involves installing telecommunications, infrastructure, and advanced surveillance technology. Many of these loans will not be paid back because they're made to developing countries that are unstable and run by autocratic leaders. China is facing a hostile political environment. China faced nearly 11,000 new trade barriers from foreign countries between 2008 and 2021. By late 2020, nearly a dozen countries had dropped out of the Belts and Roads Initiative, and another 16 are walling off their telecommunications networks from Chinese influence. Japan and India are actually paying their countries to leave China. When an invasion power like China begins to fear the future, it may act more impulsively. Historically, China fights when it is attacked or cornered. China has not waited to be attacked. It attacks first to gain tactical advantage before its strategic situation can get worse. 1950s Korea. 1962 to the present, India. This is interesting. They have a treaty with India. They cannot use ammunition or guns. They have to use clubs to fight each other. And this last battle that happened not too long ago, and I think it killed 40 Indians and 20 Chinese with clubs. 1969, the Soviet forces on their shared border. And 1979, Vietnam. When China feels vulnerable, it gets violent. It's the fear of decline, not the optimism created by perpetual ascent, that China fears. China is trying to sprint through near-term windows of opportunity before they close, and longer-term windows of vulnerability open. In doing so, China is walking a familiar path: ambition, desperation, and aggression. The Chinese rich are moving out of the country. And there's been a lot of protests. But Ben, this is a good time for you. I want to introduce Ben Seymore, my colleague. And I also want to thank Jason Carmichael for helping with the slides. Ben.
Yeah, hello, my name is Ben Seymore. I think many of you know me up here with my involvement here. I don't want to trip over this rug here. Yeah, bad thing. So, anyways, yeah, our family moved here in '69. My dad was Air Force, and we were But I was born in Taipei, and I spoke Mandarin for the first 5 years of my life, and then forgot it all, and then just went and thought I forgot it all, and then. But I grew up in Derby, and my only child. Our family is actually kind of interesting, and my mom wrote a memoir. Her name is Sophie Seymore, and she shared it with a couple of churches here. So, but she's passed about 7 years ago. But our family is. We're from Yunnan province in southwest China, and it's a very famous area because I think it was the American forces were helping the nationalist Chinese, and Kunming was the last place that the Japanese were, as they were advancing, that was their last position before they were then forced to go into Burma, India, back in World War II. So the Flying Tigers in Kunming, they've had a lot of involvement there. So it's a famous area. And my background is I don't do this for a living, obviously. I just follow China on a pretty regular basis. And I have all my mom's relatives are still living there. And so I see things, just really, really concerned. And so that's my, I'm kind of setting the table here. That's my frame of reference, and I've followed China for so long that I have a long frame reference that I think it is. I think it'll be hopefully you'll find it informative. But here I'll start out with the title of my presentation here is the Chinese Communist Party, COVID-19 virus current situation in brief. The background here is. Chairman for life Xi Jinping thought he was set. He has successfully secured his third 5-year term and has significantly weakened the other two political factions. This would be Jiang Zeming's Shanghai clique and Hu Jintao's China's Youth League faction. And subsequently, Jiang Zemin just passed away here in this past November, late November. Xi Jinping's election for a third term was unprecedented. Only Chairman Mao has served more than 2 terms in all of the CCP's history. Xi believed he could feel confident in his power, in his position. He had put all his own yes men on the Standing Politburo Committee, much to the consternation of past CCP Chairman Hu Jintao, who you've probably seen on the internet, who was hustled out of the hall of the 20th National Congress for quote-unquote falling ill because he wouldn't go along with Xi Jinping's program. So everything was set. It was going well. She thought, he's got total control now. He's, chairman for life, like Hollis had said. So things were just going to, continue to go on. But a funny thing happened though. On November 26th, protests started erupting in major cities in China over the tragic deaths of locals in a high-rise apartment building in Urumqi, Xinjiang province. And the authorities said killed officially only 10 people, as most likely in the hundreds. There's the you can see there on the left. This was probably in the daytime, and it started at night. The fire trucks couldn't get close to the building, so most all the residents were roasted alive in the apartment buildings, and they were padlocked because of the COVID restrictions, so the people couldn't get out. So the firemen couldn't get to the fire, and the people couldn't get out, and it was even though they have this, China has this probably the most sophisticated IT people control system in the world. People in China still know the truth, and it got out that if this could happen to non-Han Chinese in the backwater in northwest China, this could happen anywhere in mainland China. So the long-suffering Chinese people, they had enough. They had seen this happen, and they've had all varieties of other kinds of freedoms taken away, and this was more or less their final straw. Protests started in the major cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and really all of the major cities. We're talking all the top 1 cities and the tier 2 cities also. And so these protests started nationwide due to the public outrage over the inability of rescue crews to fight the fire due to the apartment exits being padlocked. So this is a common practice, and it's part of the draconian COVID-19 lockdown or the zero COVID policy of Xi Jinping. There was a realization in the public consciousness that this could happen. If this could happen in Urumqi, this could happen anywhere in China, as I said earlier. Transition now to mid-2023. This is just a few weeks ago. or a week ago. The picture in China's cities now is one of chaos. Hospitals everywhere are overflowing with the sick, the dying, and the dead. And I believe even here recently, they said they had something like nationwide only 60,000 deaths, which is laughable. That's probably maybe 2 to 3% of the actual figure, and most likely the actual figure is probably 6 to 7, 8, 9 million. Because I think we had 1 million deaths over 2-year time for the 2 years. This only started in late October. So, and they have 1.4 million. They have 4 times our population. And the problem in China is, and this is where politicians that are not trained, all they're really good at is being conniving, and there's no scientific background. The zero COVID has shuttered everybody. So the COVID germ, it has incredible open areas to run and to spread, and so there's very little to any herd. What's the word? Herd. Thank you. Herd immunity. So that's why it's. I've seen so many stories of families that there's like a 2-day waiting period to go see the mortuary, to even be in line to fill out the paperwork for your loved one that's passed. The bodies are taken to the crematoriums, and they're cremated, and they are then. You don't know if you're getting your loved one back. It is absolutely it's insane. What is happening there? Let me continue here. So now we've talked about that, and on Friday, January 13th, I'm referencing Airfinity, is a company in the UK. They're a data analytics company. They had a report that there are 900 million people infected with COVID-19. So we're probably past the billion mark now, with 3.7 million new daily infections and daily deaths reaching 25,000 per day, which is probably a lowball number. Mortuaries have backlogs that stretch into weeks, depending on where your relative passed. Many Chinese families were not able to have funeral services of any kind to mark the passing of their loved ones. And I've got to say that this is like the most important in Chinese culture. It sets on 3 basic ideologies: Confucianism, Taoism, and I'm forgetting the third one. But in Confucianism, they worship their ancestors. And that is the foundation on which the family. You're really sometimes the wives they're brought up to say, I'm brought up to give offspring for the family, and if a woman is not able to give offspring, many of them decide to end their life. So to not be able to go through the ritual of for your loved one's passing is huge. I can't even describe it. Anyways, I'll go on here. So as I said earlier, many families' loved ones were cremated, and these ashes may or may not have been returned to the rightful families. These are just a few of the tragic events happening in China currently. Unfortunately, the bad news is the U.S. is likely to continue to face more COVID-19 variants from China, even with the travel bans. The good news is the U.S. population has achieved herd immunity, and that should lessen the infection rate here in the U.S. And as a sideline, I'm a working, practicing nurse, and I've worked through the whole COVID situation, and I've done a lot of reading and research from my own situation, and that is something that we should have. We cannot let that ever happen again, because I think that was one of the major debacles that has affected all of us, and we've all suffered through that. And it's just been, and this is not about health policy, but I think that has just been a travesty. I would encourage my fellow Pachyderm members to research the following websites and media figures in order to keep abreast of developments in China. I went to the epochtimes.com, NTD News China Focus. It's very good. Also at Gordon Chang on Twitter. Gordon Chang was an attorney working in Hong Kong in the 80s and 90s, and he's also similar, like myself, of Chinese background, and he has a lot of connections, long-term connections in Hong Kong with the culture and the judicial system, and is very, very knowledgeable. The third one is there's 2 gentlemen that lived and younger guys that lived in mainland China. they were there probably in the late 90s and for about 10, 15 years, and they were kicked out here about 4 years ago. And you can find them on YouTube, and it's their handles are at Serpenza, ZA, Serpent ZA, and then at LaoY86. And they're very entertaining. They these are two guys. I think the first gentleman's originally from South Africa, and the other one's from upstate New York. And I don't have their. If you need more information, I can give you their actual legal names. The lab's website would be johnbachelorshow.com. I go to him. I feel like when I listen to his show, he's my IQ probably goes up at 10 to 20% because he brings on just the best people. If you want the unvarnished truth on current affairs and a whole wide range of things, he's excellent. So let me, how are we doing on time here? Okay. Let me just run through this. I'm quoting a Gordon Chang article. He's stating that there have been 6.2 million deaths due to COVID-19 according to Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center. Chang believes that the Chinese Communist Party is responsible for these 6.2 million deaths worldwide and over 1 million here in the U.S. And this is a reference from China Must Pay a Price article. And during December of 2019, this is going back to the history, through January 2020, Chinese government officials were aware of how highly contagious SARS-CoV-2 pathogen was, but nonetheless they told the world it wasn't, and when they did admit how transmissible it was, they downplayed the severity. Simultaneously, the Chinese government was locking down large portions of their country, but was nonetheless pressuring others to accept arrivals from China without restrictions or quarantines. These arrivals carried COVID from central China to the rest of the world starting in the fall of 2019 through the late winter of early spring and early spring of 2020. Some business analysts have calculated the cost of COVID-19 pandemic in the $5 to $10 trillion U.S. range. It's the hope of this writer that the U.S. will someday be able to recoup the financial costs from the Chinese Communist government for this unspeakable crime unleashed on the world. Postscript. China's zero COVID policy was discontinued overnight on December 7th. 2 weeks earlier, the CCP stated that zero COVID policy was excellent. Within 2 weeks, and what happened? Within 2 weeks, nationwide protests against this policy scared the CCP into changing this policy. Crowds shouted, "Down with the CCP, down with Xi Jinping." I don't believe the CCP has an unbreakable grip on power in China. I hope we can all support democratic groups that want to break the back of the CCP government. They are a stain on humanity and have committed unspeakable crimes against their own people and humanity also. Thank you.
Ben, you might want to stay up here.
Questions? Okay, so I noticed that the last speaker talked about protests happening all over China. Is there some underground communication that coordinates these, or is this just spontaneous?
It's spontaneous, and that's what it was spontaneous, and that is what, if you look at it closely and just look at the reports, that tells you how fragile the CCP's grip on power. We don't have to come to a kinetic event. That'd be terrible. I mean, there'd be thousands of people, lives lost. But it's the Chinese people that have to shake that have to destroy, have to, put, like Reagan said, put the CCP into the ash heap of history or something like that. I'm quoting loosely, but.
Was that from my article?
Yeah, it could be.
I have two questions. First question is, if China attacks Taiwan, do you think the USA should send military to Taiwan to protect it?
Let me touch
The
it.
second question is...
Let me answer that question first. Let me answer that question.
Between India and China, and China thinks it belongs to them, but India doesn't think so. What do you think about Ladakh? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. First of all, do I think the last slide that I had on my program talked about what is Taiwan going to do? Taiwan needs to do, and with help of the other free nations, it needs to make the Taiwan Strait a death trap. It needs to deter the People's Liberation Army by using whatever is readily available, not what's going to be available 5 years from now. Yes, they're building nuclear subs. Yes, Australia has worked with us to get a nuclear submarine going. What we need now, and what Taiwan needs desperately, are missile launchers, armed drones, electric jammers, smart mines, cyber attacks, and sensors at sea. I mean, literally, if they think we are going to know with our satellites whether they're amassing their 40 million extra men across the Taiwan Strait, we're going to know that, because they're going to have to put all those boats, line them up there on the coast. But make it a death trap. That's my answer to that. As far as India and Brunei, and which is involved right in there with India and China, they made a treaty, and this is the funniest treaty I ever saw, that they are not going to use guns, artillery. They are literally have to use clubs. And this really happened. There was a conflict here not too long ago that they had a big fight, and this is all up in the Himalayas. Very high altitude, and they had a big fight, and they killed 40 Indians, I believe, and 20 Chinese with clubs. We're talking the Stone Age here, So, but India is a big competitor. Like I said, India is paying its companies to exit China. I think India is a big competitor in its population. China is about 1.45 billion, thank you. We're 328 million. Taiwan's 28 million. But I understand this too about Taiwan. I believe the Taiwanese own firearms, the individual people. So it's not just their military. You're talking about a really drastic war. They want those chips. They want the access to the sea lanes. Next question.
Does there not exist in China a number of ethnic minorities, such as Tibetans, Manchurians, people of Inner Mongolia, people of East Turkmen, I forget what their ethnic name is, it starts with U.
Uyghurs.
Uyghurs. And people of Inner Mongolia who would like to be independent. If China does something like invade Taiwan, can we not do whatever we can to encourage these independence movements to rise up and destabilize China?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think in the past they've already they've done that, but China has such an incredible police state that there's a lot of people they like with Tibet that they've had to escape into Nepal or northern India to kind of like the Dalai Lama did for that. But China just has it's like George Orwell on steroids. We were there. I took our family there in 2019, and everywhere you go, there's a camera. Now whether it's functioning now, that's another thing. But it puts that fear in you, just like Orwell. That doubt: am I being monitored? So it's. I think the top leadership. I think it's not just so much doing away with it's the system, not the individuals. Because you do away with Xi Jinping or whoever the other guy is, they'll just bring up another person. So China, I mean, they deserved democracy, and it's not like us going to Iraq or Iran. They need to figure out their own way through that. But the Chinese people are some of the nicest people you ever meet, and I think most of you have met a lot of Chinese people. They're earnest. They're all family centered. They're hard workers. I mean. And they deserve, a fair shake, and they're not getting it.
Next question.
I got an easy question for you. We all know who the big guy was, right? And that 10% of Hunter's earnings went to the big guy. And also we find out that this Penn Biden think tank where the Chinese gave $100 million, I suppose, what I've heard, to this Biden think tank. So is our president compromised?
Is he?
Well, we live in a democracy. And as Republicans, we need to get out there and organize ourselves, because obviously the Democrats have. The only thing about, Democrats is that when the rich people run out of money, it's going to have massive misery itself. And so, is our president compromised, is your question? Personally, I believe he is.
Yeah, how long could Taiwan last if China blockades it?
Here,
Militarily, if China blockades Taiwan, people are figuring about 3 months. Coincidentally, that's about how much China's oil reserve will last if we knock out their pipelines and at the same time block the Strait of Malacca and the Strait of Hormuz. About 3 months.
And I'll kind of add to that. You can go to the John Batchelor show. He had actually a speaker on there on a podcast. He's from the U.S. Naval War College. I think he was not a full admiral, but the guy's excellent. And their current policy right now is to have mobile units of Marines and stuff, and do like what they did in Guadalcanal, where you have the Army, the Navy, small little mobile units, to where we're not a big sitting duck because for the Chinese armaments and stuff. So for Taiwan, the Taiwan people are tough. They're tough people. I went over there after I graduated in '86, and I was like, it's Taiwan. You could get a steak dinner at 3 a.m. They were everybody was hustling, was working. Everybody was getting wealthy because they had an open economy, and it was just in their nature to go out and work. CCP says they've done so much for the Chinese people. They've done zero. It's only because of the Chinese people's desire to hustle, because there's really no safety net over there. It's either you work or you starve.
I think the question was, do you think Biden was compromised?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I kind of got off on that. Yeah, it's obvious, and he's been planted, and they've had all kinds of different. It's a joke. I mean, he's an embarrassment and an ongoing danger to our national security. Oh, sorry.
Why did their epidemic occur 2 years after ours? And secondly,
Wait a second, say that again.
why did their pandemic occur 2 years after ours when it started there? And secondly, why did they lock their country down when they already knew it didn't work in
That's yours.
Yeah, because it's an opaque system. You can't trust anything, hardly anything that can come out. Even the Western media, they're dishonest, and everything they do is to further the Chinese Communist Party. So the data, we don't even know the original data now from the Wuhan, the original outbreak. It's all been cleaned, and so to answer your question, really no one really knows. I don't think there's no competent Western medical authority that's been over there to be able to get the measure of the problem. They welded people and families into their high sky-rise apartments, and many of them starved to death. So I guess that's one way of stopping the COVID spread, is that you actually starve the population so they can't go out. But that's pretty a bizarre method, and so they were able to keep some control of it. But what has happened is they've not been able then to do the normal process of getting ill, getting over it, and then your body only developing the antibodies. So now the COVID, and they have various different strains there that are all, and no one really has a good handle on it from what I've been able to gather. So it's a big question mark, and we should not be accepting any Chinese nationals into North America or anywhere in the world until they get a handle on the COVID-19.
I keep hearing over Republican radio that China is buying up American farmland at a feverish pace. Is there any way to slow that down?
A lady talked to me about that just the other day. I don't know if I see her here in the crowd today, but actually, when I started out and make this presentation, I said, this is a big topic. There's a lot of things we can talk about. I think that's something that one of you members out here ought to take on and make a presentation on that, because I know they are doing it. The extent or any numbers about it, I don't know.
Okay, next question right there. Yes, in a meeting between our president and the head of the Chinese party, they were at opposite ends of the stage, and the Chinese premier, or whatever you want to call him, he made our president walk her across the stage to shake hands and meet with him. Would you explain the reasons for that?
Well, I think it goes back to in Chow Enlai's motto about diplomats, and of course the main diplomat is the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, and that is stand firmly in place. And so he wants to show the world all of those things: who opens the door for somebody, who goes in first, all of those things in a high-level meeting, they're all considered. And the fact that Biden got up and did that, I think, do you think Ronald Reagan would have done that? Yeah. So, they're all considered, and that's just part of showmanship they have.
Thank you for a very interesting program so far. Speaking of the Ukraine war and their adversarial relationship with Russia and the ties between Russia, Russian oil, and China, do you think that China would get involved in the Ukraine war if Russia began to really falter and look like they were going to lose?
Right now, what China and Russia are doing, Russia has an enormous amount of natural gas, and they're building a natural gas pipeline through Mongolia at this point. I think a lot of that is going to be based on the fossil fuels and how they work that out. But also, who else is China going to align with? I mean, Russia still has a substantial nuclear arsenal, and China is, like I said, was going to equal ours in 2030. So China and Russia are going to be like this. But on the other side, we have two very autocratic dictators. They're not going to get along for long. That's something, somebody's going to upset somebody else.
Around here?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I had a comment, Hollis, about what you said that I agree with. That we have made China. I remember how proud everyone was in '72. Oh, we're opening up China. We'll make all kind of money. Hooray for us. And basically, we financed China. What China is today, we've done it. We've financed it. We've paid for it. We've paid for the rope that's going to hang ourselves.
That's right.
So apparently you agree with that in general. The second thing is when we talk about democracy, it's so interesting that, oh, China's not a democracy, they're bad. But think of the democracies we have. England, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, they're all democracies. And what difference has that made in the way those governments, those democratic governments, have treated the people and how sheepish the people have been in these democratic countries submitting to the government dictates?
I'll take that for a second. We may both want to talk about this. We were optimistic in '72 when the ping pong guys went over there, and played the ping pong game. We were hopeful. We were hopeful that China would come back and realize that they want to be part of our open economy. We want to have open sea lanes. We want to have open trade. We want to have our people prosper. But China wasn't buying into that. And like I said, it's their vision of themselves. They see themselves as heirs to a Chinese state that was a superpower for most of history. They are stuck. They've already made this clear. The CCP is the power source. It's autocratic. It represses. It's getting very good at it. That's what it's exporting. But to answer your question in a very broad sense, an authoritarian state can never feel secure in its own rule because it does not enjoy the freely given consent of the governed. And so,
I've got a great little, I've got a little great factoid here that you guys may not be aware, but China spends more as a percentage of their GNP, of their economy, on internal police than they do on their military. They spend more on their internal police than they. You think of how much the billions, the tens of billions they spend more on. It's called Gongwanju, public. They call it public security. So,
Let me add one more thing to that too. He's 70 years old. He's obese. He's a heavy smoker. He could die any minute. Okay? Well, are we going to get somebody like Putin to come in, or are we going to get somebody like Gorbachev? Okay? Who knows what kind of leader is going to come in? The kind of leader that we can hope that would come in would be one that says, hey, our population's getting old. We need to take care of them. We need to have a humanitarian conscience here. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen. That has not been their history. They have these 40 million people, extra men they have. They could just send them into a meat grinder. And I don't think they would really even care.
Yeah.
Two-part question. I think I've probably time-wise, I'm probably the end of the road. Maybe I won't get to the dull part, but
How disappointing.
my first part is, Davos is talking climate change, climate change, climate change. China's position on carbon-based energy, whether it's oil, gas, or coal, and their whole attitude towards climate change, I'd be interested in. Second question. Japan's westernmost islands are actually 70 miles east of Taiwan. There's a whole bunch stretching from Okinawa south and west of Japan proper. If something would break out between Taiwan and China, what is the chance the Japanese get drawn in?
Real fast. First of all, there's China has a lot of ways to go. They're making these islands. They have Taiwan has the Rockman Island. It's not too far off of the Chinese mainland. They have the Maltese Island. Japanese have the whole island chain coming down. Now they want to put Marines out there with Marines and Japanese soldiers out there on one of those Sasaku. Yeah, Sasaku or something like that island. Those guys are it'd be like Wake Island. They're dead. They're putting them out there to get killed. They're dead. I saw that and I said, this is absolute crazy way to use your Marines. But I don't know if we answered your question. As far as the climate change, they have just drawn us into this thing. They're not doing it, obviously. Look at their land. It's all polluted. Look at their water. Look at their air. Before the Olympics, they had to shut down all industrial production around Beijing, just in order so we had a clean sky during the Olympics. They're all about the show, the front. Excuse me, go ahead.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, and I'm going to agree with Hollis on that. I think really, unless they're able to control China, this whole regimen, anything that you do internationally about global warming and all that is just theater. Will have no effect. And about the attack on Taiwan. The China used that in Mandarin. It's a Diaoyu Dao, and it was the Senkaku Islands. They used that. It was owned by a private Japanese investor, legally, and then Chinese just through coercion, like they did with a lot of South China Island seas. They try to take it over, just bullying, and I think that would be one of the kind of the hair triggers, that would start things off if they actually did a move on that. Taiwan actually, there's these two islands, Jingmen and Matsu. They're right off of the coast of China. I mean, we're talking like 2 miles, 3 miles, and Taiwan still controls those. So because they control that to keep them from becoming stepping stones for the mainland. So they need to be fortified.
Well, we both want to thank you for your time. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.